What's up, my people? Welcome to Fellowship Bible Church's Sermon Spotlight, where we're coming at you each and every week with a fresh weekend to debrief in an effort to send biblical truth. What better way to do that than by the power of conversation? I'm one of your hosts, Caleb Pearson. Joining me in the host spotlight, Miss Rose Lauck. Rose,
Hi,
how are
Caleb.
you?
I'm great.
Good. You are the mother of a graduating student.
I am. He actually graduated last Friday. Was his graduation ceremony.
Yes, from school. Oh, man.
Yeah, and you were his, he has to do a thesis, the curriculum we use, and you were one of his judges, so tell.
I'm so glad Isaac was the first student of our youth group to invite me to a senior thesis. It was fun. I was intimidated by that homeschool crowd with these thesis statements. It was the smartest room I've ever been in, I think. But yeah, it was fun. He's back with us, Senior Pastor Mark Carey. Mark, how you doing, my friend?
Doing okay.
Good. Thank you for being here. Guys, why don't we jump into a Sunday in review? Now, I must confess, I didn't go to church here this weekend. I was down at FBC Shenandoah. Yeah, preaching down at Shenandoah. So wasn't able to be here in person for the sermon, but I'd love to jump into what we were talking about. Rose, I'll come your way first, and Mark, we'll see what you have for us.
Well, one of my favorite topics, which is story. I love a good story, and I love when we make connections of concepts and ideas. And I just feel like I've been sharing with the worship team, I feel like this is an important time in the life of our church because I feel like the word story is coming out louder and clearer from the video we had to the sermon series to where we're going next, and the idea of discipling one another, because I think a lot of discipleship happens through stories and life experiences. And so I just I really enjoyed the sermon. I really enjoyed, Mark, that you used Paul as our example, that Paul himself shared his story, and he shared it a lot. One of the things I've been impressed with as I read Paul's letters is that in every single one of Paul's letters, I think you can find the gospel. Jesus was born, he died on the cross for our sins, and he was raised again, laid out that simply. So Paul just does a great job of modeling this idea of, listening to other story, sharing his story so he can share God's story. So I thought it was great.
I don't think Paul ever lost the wonder and amazement that once I was lost and now I was found. Once I was blind, but now I see. The amazing grace. I don't think Paul ever lost sight of that. And even towards the end, and for Timothy, he talks about, I am the chief of sinners, and yet, God saved me, and to see the boldness of Paul in Acts 26 before Agrippa, or in Acts 22 before the Jewish leaders, no matter where it was, Paul could boldly tell his story, and that was the point.
What came out in the Bible story video, like the shipwrecks that Paul went through and the hardships that he went through, all of those things only pointed more largely and loudly to the God who had saved him, So even in those trials and in those hard things, and we face trials and hard things, as Mark Seals shared, even in those trials and those hard things, Paul still kept pointing everyone to the glory of God in the process.
And that was the point, hopefully, again, of the larger, the meta story of the morning was we all have a story, and we need to capture that and share it with other people. We need to be cognizant that our story wasn't by accident. And as Paul in Galatians 1, I brought that passage out, but as Paul in Galatians 1 talks about, I was set apart even from my mother's womb. When God called me, even from my mother's womb, I was called. And that's the very essence of the word church, ecclesia. We're all called. And Paul mentions that in 1 Corinthians 1:9, God is faithful through whom we have been called into fellowship with his Son, with Jesus. He's called us, 1 Peter, out of darkness into his marvelous light.
And continuing, we are living stones, being built up. So we are individuals, but being called into this larger church body. And I think like Mike Lukens did such a great job at the beginning of the service saying those words to us as worshipers and as members of the body, that we are individuals, but we are called here together this morning to glorify the name of God.
Yeah.
You used a few verses out of Galatians 1, 13 through 17, I think. But Galatians 1 ends with a little bit of Paul's credentials and a little bit of his resume and his story. And he doesn't flaunt his letters with everything he's been through the whole time. But I love when we come across passages where you do see how the Lord used this guy. His story is incredible. But the reason he's writing the letter, it's earlier on in that chapter, he says in Galatians 1, I'm astonished you're so quickly turning to a different gospel. Oh, by the way, not that there is another gospel, but you're teaching like there is. And so there's a correct, and then there's a reminder, and then there's his testimony and story. You just see the relationship happening and the desire for one another. And so when we talk about this idea of how somebody else's story can impact ours, or Mark's was on the podcast, did you show the whole thing on Sunday morning?
No, because that's a 25-minute or so podcast.
It's out though, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So it's on the
We
YouTube.
put it out yesterday.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was 12 minutes.
Okay.
And if you just want to see the 12-minute cut version, you can still go on the website, FBC, the live service.
Okay, cool.
And you can still watch last weekend's service. So the cut 12-minute
Cool,
is
okay.
still available to watch there. But then the full 20-minute is on that.
So you just went shorter than
Yeah.
you normally do? Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
gotcha. Cool.
Because it was really the application of the service.
Yeah.
Mark Seals had referred back to a sermon from November 21st on we did that series on evangelism back in November. So it's listen to their story, so you build that rapport and trust, then share a little bit of your story so that you can ultimately point them to his story. Well, Mark has taken that little
Example,
outline and he is using it big time. And so he shared how
That's cool.
that was, he was applying that into many, many different life situations. And again, so that was the application really of the sermon. We let Mark Seals show us and tell us how it can be applied. Just like the Apostle Paul had a story and he shared that story before King Agrippa, so he can ultimately point it to God's story. Every one of us has a story, and we need to listen to other people's story, but find that common link so that you can share a little bit of your story that will be the stepping stone that you can use to tell God's story and point people to Christ.
I remember a few years ago, I was already on staff at this point, but I felt like the Lord was stirring in me a realization that I was only looking for encouragement in my own story. Like, what is the Lord doing? And I was only using my own life and my own circumstance to decide what the Lord was doing, instead of realizing, let me reopen the door to other people's stories. How can I be encouraged by God moving in the life of somebody else around me? Because for me, the encouragement I need was in the testimony of the person sitting right next to me for weeks on end. And I was just so, I don't know, self-absorbed or focused. You limit the work God may be doing when we think like that. And so, Rose, I have a question for you, putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
Why are stories so impactful? You've been here since 95, right? Okay, you've been here since 93. It's 90. Bruh, how long you been here? 90 whatever?
January.
Okay, 1940. Okay, 93.
1940.
I've been here since 96, okay?
Right.
We know a lot of the people around here. There are stories I remember here in 8, 9, 10.
Right.
We got these pastors retiring. Stories are coming to a head a little bit, and that's why it's so cool we did this. But why do they mean this much to us, Rose? And what is it about capturing a story?
I can't even express that because I don't know the answer. I was thinking, I knew I was going to be sitting in this chair today. So I was thinking a little bit about like what makes a good story? Why are stories important? Why do stories communicate so much to us? I even looked up a couple of blog articles about how do you write a good story, and I just think there is something inside us as human beings that longs for community. And being in community with each other means understanding where you've come from, where you're going, and how you relate to other people. And without stories, we can't do that. And I also think stories are art. And I do, in my core, I do believe that God created us in his image partly because we can create. And telling a story is creating. It's creating an environment. It's creating an atmosphere. And in the process of creating, we glorify God. And I was sharing with Les Sillers a couple weeks ago, one of the sorrows of my heart is we in the church sometimes have relegated the best storytelling to the world. Because I love Disney. I don't love the messages that they send, but I love their commitment to excellence. I love their commitment to storytelling. I love their commitment to understanding the meaningfulness and the symbolism that can be poured into stories. And I want to see us as a church reclaim those arts for us. And we can't do that until we start to tell our stories.
Yeah, I thought it was neat in the second service upstairs in F2 when the video was finished of Mark's, people broke out and applauded because they were
really cool.
they were captured by the story and the realness of what God had done and is doing in Mark's life, and they just applauded.
That's awesome.
A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I, Lisa and I, were down at the Billy Graham Center, the Cove. It was a pastor's conference, pastor's retreat, and Jim Cymbala was the speaker. And if you know Jim Cymbala, he wrote the Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire, and numerous books. A pastor of Brooklyn Tabernacle Church in Brooklyn, where he grew up. So he's been there 50 years as a pastor. He's 80 years old now. Master storyteller, and but he, even before every session, he had come prepared with Brooklyn Tabernacle puts together a lot of testimony videos because a lot of people have gotten saved over the years through that ministry. And before every message, there was this riveting story of the power of God in changed lives. I mean, riveting story. And it just set the tone. And there was there was about 400 pastors and wives and husbands and there. But the telling of stories and the way Cymbala told his own stories and life, it galvanized people's hearts together because you could identify. He told one story about his daughter who had been wayward and really lost. I mean, really dark story. But she came to faith and back to the Lord. I think that was just more of an illustration. At the end of his message, though, later that evening, he was obviously prompted by the Lord, and he said, if there's anybody here, if you've got a child who is wayward or doesn't know the Lord yet, I just want you to come forward, and we're going to pray. And I kid you not, more than half of the pastors got up and went forward, tears streaming down their face. And partly because of Cymbala's own vulnerability, telling his story.
And that's what I was going to say, is there's something about us being vulnerable to one another that's really hard. It's really hard in our world where everything's supposed to be perfect, and we're all supposed to be perfect, and we're all supposed to be put together and wear the right clothes and drive the right car and have the perfectly clean house. And like, there is something in this world when we can open ourselves up with that kind of authenticity.
Well, I think there's a lie that says, I'll tell my story once it's a success story in my own mind or in whatever right, instead of just saying, well, if you want to know where things are at and what I'm wrestling with as far as what God's doing and what I know he's done, what I'm, continuing to grow. And there's something, an article came out years ago about what young people seek for in peer groups and in significant others, like qualities and traits. Okay. So I click on this article. I'm like, this is going to be some garbage. The number one trait people my age look for in peer groups and a significant other is their ability to tell stories. That's what this data gave us. And then, so another article weeks later came out. Well, what does it mean to tell stories? What do you look for in a storyteller? And the top two things people valued, not that we cater to my peer group, but transparency and a little bit of humor. For whatever reason, there's something about a story like that where if you can tell it's not fake, it's not polished, it's just raw, then you're disarmed.
So,
like those
so
pastors
when you bring
were.
up a movie like Princess Bride,
Which I was just going to say he did on the podcast.
You bring up Princess Bride, or you talk about Walmart evangelism.
And listen, like I wasn't here the weekend, but I watched the podcast online, and I knew he was about to share what was going on. And I mean, he was mentioning books of the Bible, and then he said it reminds me of Princess Bride, and I was like, what? Like, it was so.
Only thing better would have been something about Star Trek.
Yeah, right. So I was like, what? Where is he going with this? And then all he was doing was being himself a little bit and saying, here's something I thought was funny, and the Lord, it stirred in me, and it ended up being an encouragement. This idea of Billy Crystal being an encouragement. I was like, that is so cool.
Yeah.
One of the things I adored about his testimony was that he said, okay, there's two outcomes here. one outcome is that the Lord has ended my life with cancer, and it's going to end in short time. And the other is that I'll have a Hezekiah, he called it a Hezekiah outcome, where I have many more years. And
crazy.
It sounded like he and his wife wrestled through it, but then they came around to okay, Lord, whatever your will is, whether it be for me to have longer or whether it be for me to go home tomorrow, your will be done. And to me, that was just that was it, because sometimes we tell these stories and I think that's why we hesitate to tell our stories, Caleb, because you watch other people's stories and there's a happy ending. And so when your story has what could appear to be a sad ending, you tend to hide it, or you don't know how to deal with that, or you don't know how to accept that. Well, I prayed for healing and the Lord didn't grant it. Okay. That's the Lord's will then, you know?
Or if you tell your story and it's still messy, you're still in the mess of it. People don't know what to do with that. I know someone who does that well. And in the Bible studies that he circulates around, it leaves people a little bit on edge because he's very open and very vulnerable about his own personal struggles. And everybody else is having their own personal struggles, but at least here's a guy who's willing to admit it and sit it and say, but God, but God, and then you point people to his story. I think is what's so neat about
the other thing I'll say is I think sometimes we don't ourselves recognize when we're in the middle of a story. Does that make sense?
It does.
Like I was thinking, okay, if they asked me to tell a story, what story would I tell? So I'll just tell it real quick. The story I would tell is that Roger and I were in a hard time in our marriage where I don't know whether he just had a job that didn't pay well, or I don't remember he had been laid off from a job. Financially, we were in a hard place, and it was the end of the month. And in the morning, I didn't have enough groceries to feed. You know what I mean? Like I had probably beans and soup or something, but not really to make a meal. So I had $20 in the bank. And I prayed. I was like, okay, Lord, I probably should go to the grocery store and get some food, but I'm not sure. I'm just not sure what to do. So, would you help me make this? Basically, I was trying to get God to help me decide whether to spend my $20 on the food, whether to put food on the credit card, or whether to, just kind of eat beans, what to do. And I remember I was cleaning in the kitchen. The kids were really little. And literally, it's one of those stories. There was a knock at the door, and I opened the door. And standing on the other side of the door Mike Grams was standing there of all people. And Mike Grams had a laundry basket full of food because he owned a rental around the corner from where I lived. And the people had left and had left in the middle of the night kind of a deal, and had left a freezer full of food. And I couldn't use all the food because obviously it had been in someone else's refrigerator. I didn't know, but there was some frozen hamburger. And so we had sloppy joes for dinner that night. And it was 2 or 3 days before a paycheck or something was coming. And so we were fine from then on. But it was one of those moments where God provided, it wasn't until I think a year later that it dawned on me that I had one of those major God providing moments. In the moment, I was just cooking hamburger for my family. You know what I mean? So sometimes in the middle of the story, we don't even realize. So I think it's important to do things like journal. And I think it's important to do things like remember. You know what I mean? I think it's important to store events in your life for that purpose, because God is unfolding them perhaps for the benefit of someone else.
And it's important to be in community, because that's oftentimes where those stories come out. Where, so one reason why you're aware of those stories is because people are asking you, so how did it go today? Or what's going on in your life today? And when you're in community, small group, or of some, you're prompted. And it's safer. It's so important to be in community, because that's oftentimes where those stories get shared, and then it's motivating. It's encouraging. And again, one of the things we talked about, though, is that let's be careful to listen to other people's stories first, and be sensitive to that, and then God will bring to our attention. I think that happens, doesn't it, all the time, where He'll bring a story or something into your mind that connects with that person's story, so that you can make that bridge with God's story. And you walk away and you realize this was a divine happening. There was something divine that took place here, And I was a part of it in telling that story.
And I'll refer people actually to the podcast. I think the last time I sat in this chair, because it's been a long time, one of the last times I sat in this chair, Mark, was when you were in this evangelism series that we're talking about. And we spent a lot of time sitting here talking about how to ask good questions, right? So there is some skill development that can happen in our own personal lives. We can learn how do I create good questions, and how do I listen well, and how do I ask questions that legitimately show interest in other people and really help them make some of these connections, you know?
And if you ever get lost about how to do that, watch reruns of Johnny Carson. I was doing that recently. I mean, he knew how to ask questions of his guests and the stories that would come out and follow. Anyway, that's great. By the way, a Monday night on the 23rd, May 23rd, Monday night, Don Den Hartog, our former pastor of biblical education, is going to be here that weekend. On Saturday morning, the 21st, he's actually going to do a seminar from 8:30 to 11:30 on how to study the Bible and how to get into the Word. It's a condensed 3-hour thing. But Monday night, he is going to do a 90-minute, hour and a half presentation on how you can tell your story, take your stories, and help provide kind of relevancy in the teaching of the Word.
Called a spoonful of sugar, how to apply biblical study.
Yeah.
Which is a Disney quote, I will add.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's
By who?
awesome.
Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
And he's doing that in person, right?
Because you know why?
No.
It'll help make the medicine go down.
Yeah, exactly.
Guys, don't don't get this song stuck in my head. I had that song stuck in my head from 2nd grade through 4th. All right. And Don will be here in person.
That's
doing
right.
That's
right.
Cool.
That's right.
So,
yeah. And what else has happened that
And
weekend?
later that weekend, Sunday, May 22nd, is John Morrison's final Sunday. So, and Pastor Mark mentioned in our all-staff meeting, he can say whatever he wants at this point. So you don't want to miss it.
You do not want to miss that service. Because
Outside.
You want to be part of the special trick that Caleb Pearson, Mark Francis, and I have dreamed up for the end of that service.
I was
you
hoping I'd fly under the radar, but now the name's dropped. So all your complaints can be emailed to me. It should be fun, exciting season.
Outdoors.
For sure. Yep, outside. 10 a.m. one service. So as a reminder to our listeners and viewers all over the place, you can find us Sermon Spotlight. We pop right up, as well as fbcva.org. That's where you can find all the things we're talking about, including this past service and what's to come. The fact of the matter, everybody, is that sermons are not meant to just take an hour, but rather transform a lifetime. Until next week, much love. God bless.